Hey there you lot, welcome back to Fact Blends Fish. Today's video is going to be a deboxing and a product review on the Humble sponge filter. I've used these things for donkey's years down here in my room. They tick a lot of boxes for me. I'm going to prepare a case, the pros and cons of, and I'm going to talk to you about all that. And if you can bear with me till the end of the video, I'm going to show you how to make one of these fluidised bed adaptations to the sponge filter, which just supercharges their capacity. And I'll talk you through what I learnt on my journey through devising those to the best fit for my room. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, stick around. I'll see you on the other side. Just going to lead off straight from the get-go. If you've watched a few of my videos, you've probably worked out by now that I'm not going to ever likely be sponsored by anybody, because I don't often advocate for purpose bought products. I'm running a large fish room down here in Tassie. I've got 99 tanks in here, lots of species of fish, and obviously to go full Monty on the best and biggest of the gadgets on each tank is just not going to be cost effective for me. I'm limited by space, I'm limited by dollars. The product I'm going to show you today is the Petworks branded large sponge filter. I am in no way affiliated with Petworks. I buy these from a wholesaler that I do get some of my basic knickknacks that I use around the room. And on that front, like I'd be lucky to be using 10 products that you would buy in your average aquarium shop, because I'm on a larger scale than most. However, these they tick a lot of boxes for me, as I mentioned in the quick intro. And let's get on to the exciting part, the deboxing. This is a large sponge filter from Petworks, and it's pretty simple. That's 98% of it, and we have a little plastic tube that goes on top to direct the airflow once it comes out of there. We need airline, that's not part of the box, but what do you expect? The going rate on these, by the way, if you get on eBay or on online stores, is $13, $14 for a filter that's with adequate aeration, is going to allow you to look after a 250 odd litre tank without too much trouble, depending on your stocking rates. So that's pretty good for a simple off the shelf product. Very, very simple makeup, nothing to put together other than airline on that nipple and that tube, and hook up to an air source. In my case, I have an air blower, lots of air. In your case, you're going to have to buy an air pump. So doesn't get much simpler than that, folks. This is what your filter looks like when you pull it all to pieces. I don't know that there's any widely accepted names for the various components in the trade, but we'll make them up as we go along. This is our base. That's a weighted base to hold the filter upright, and certainly in the early days to help it to sink. The sponges are very floaty when you first take them out of the tank. The next piece clicks into our base there, which is a means of adapting the two little barrels. You'll see it's got the ribs in it there, which is to allow water flow from the sponge into the centre. The main mode of action is that the air goes in the top, down through that central stem, we'll show you one there. The central stem runs down the centre of the filter all the way to the bottom into that little chamber, the void that I mentioned, and then it comes up and out the top through the updraft, that creating a draw. I think draw is the best word for it. This is a large filter, and it's got two of those barrel sections in the middle. Smaller filters may only have one, and a smaller sponge. Our sponge simply goes over the top of the two barrels, and then we have a cap that goes in the top. And the main thing to be careful of whenever you're handling these is that you remember that the stems down the centre are a little bit brittle, and they certainly get more brittle over time when it comes to, in my situation, using hard water for breeding of African cichlids. I've put a bit of airline on there onto that central little nipple, and we want to get a really good seal there. So a good tip is to get some hot water. Either you can boil your kettle, or get the hottest water you can out of your tap and dip your silicone tube into that to get it nice and soft when you're putting it on, and that'll give you the best possible fit. And that's a good rule of thumb for any time you're trying to fit hoses onto connections. And the last little piece is our uplift tube, which directs the water flow out the top. So yeah, pretty simple innards to them. And one thing to be mindful of, I don't know what the number is you're going to look for on your box. That sponge, they rate them in terms of, I think it's porosity, and it's effectively the number of little holy bits, voids within the sponge per sort of cubic centimetre, I suppose. And we've all probably washed dishes at times. Most times the sponge you use at dish time is a pretty fine sponge. It traps a lot of water and sort of retains that water when you lift it up. Bigger or lower porosity, I think, has bigger holes, which is better for flow and probably better for time between it getting clogged. But what can happen is that it doesn't always hold the dirty water when you lift them out of your tank. So you might find the best way to lift them out at that stage is to have a little bucket that you can sort of put under it as you lift that out, so that if it does suddenly sort of backwash itself on the way out, you trap that bit of dirty water and you're not releasing it into your tank. Now that we've deboxed, we've seen how it comes out of the package, we've pulled one to bits and seen how the parts go together. We'll move on to what you can expect out of this as a filter in your situation. There's three generally accepted types of filtration that we just talk about in the aquarium keeping hobby. The first is physical or mechanical filtration, and this will give you that straight off the bat out of the box. That's where this filter is going to trap particles and debris. Small stuff that's drifting around in your tank will eventually be drawn into the filter, and depending on the size of that particle, it will either sort of stick on the outside of the filter or work its way into the pores where it will remain trapped. So physical filtration, it's certainly a good thing. Like we don't want little bits of crap floating around in there that affect our visibility, but it's not the most important thing from the health point of view of our fish. Which brings us on to the second type of filtration, which is your biological filtration. You've probably heard terms like a cycled aquarium or the reference to the nitrogen cycle. The biggest issue we face with keeping fish in boxes is that we're adding often protein-rich foods and the fish are excreting. So there's two sources of ammonia, basically as a byproduct of the breakdown of food and fecal matter. Ammonia is really nasty for your fish, and we need to get that out of your tank lickety split, or else you're going to have all sorts of issues with your fish health. The biological filtration mechanism is achieved by this filter being colonised by what are called beneficial bacteria. There's a couple of major groups of bacteria based on the genus, one being Nitrosomonas, the other being Nitrobacter. I believe it's Nitrosomonas that convert our highly toxic ammonia, highly toxic, to a slightly less toxic but still bad compound called nitrite. The nitrite then get broken down by the Nitrobacter and moved on to the less toxic, much less toxic nitrate. Nitrate is a sort of an end product which will linger in your aquarium until you do a water change, or if you're running plants or mosses, they will also strip nitrate out because it's effectively a fertiliser. So straight out of the box, this isn't going to get you that nitrogen cycle, the beneficial bacteria loading, right? So you need to seed your tank, which can be done by off-the-shelf products in liquid form. You can buy beneficial bacteria in bottles and you can pour some into a tank and start a colony that way. In my situation around here, with 100 odd of these filters running at what we call mature level, fully colonised with beneficial bacteria, it's real easy for me to, for example, I had a tank leak last week. I had to take it all apart, or all the stuff out, do a repair, do a leak test, put my gear back in. Now that's pretty brutal to beneficial bacteria, which, by the way, don't just live on your sponge. They are going to eventually colonise throughout your tank, in your substrate, on your ornaments, anywhere. So obviously, to pull a tank down from scratch, I've lost a lot of good bacteria, but that tank's now running with fish in it again the day after I got through the leak test, because I'm able to take a couple of mature filters from a tank that's already running and straight in and straight back to a good capacity. So mechanical filtration straight out of the box, yes, big tick. Biological straight out of the box, no, but with time, and with time it could mean 4 weeks to get it to a stage where you can deal with light stocking loads of fish. But I think a mature tank system, including mature filters, we're really looking at 6 months to a year to get a fully cycled, fully seasoned aquarium. The third type of chemical filtration is what we call chemical filtration. This isn't giving you that in any form. Chemical filtration is typically achieved with products like Purigen and the humble activated carbon, which goes into many canister filters. And so this isn't giving you chemical filtration in any form. Chemicals that you want out of your tank, typically chloramines, chlorines, and you're going to be knocking them out before they go into your tank if you're doing your job properly with agents such as Seachem Safe or Prime. And in my case, I run all my water through a carbon filter before it goes into a tank anyway. I I'll show you later on in the build of the K1 fluidised bed, where I think it's probably possible to maybe incorporate some carbon into that situation as well, and you might be able to get all three out of your sponge filter. But at this stage, 2 out of 3 ain't bad for such a cheap product. We'll have a wander around the room now and see some of these filters in action. I'm a breeder of African cichlids down here in Tassie. I've got 99 tanks in this room, which are varying volumes and sizes. We've got some standard sort of 4x18 by 18s in the old speak up on the top row here. I'm typically in my breeding tanks, and this is a breeding tank, I run 2 filters minimum, and that's based on my whole room is powered by one single air blower. That's the noise in the background. That's 370 watts of power, which basically, you know, that's a finite amount of air, and I keep as many filters going as I can that it doesn't end up impacting upon pressure. And why I like to have a couple of filters per tank where applicable is that it allows you to have heavy stocking rates, but it also allows for mishaps, so that if for some reason a filter does become blocked or airline disconnects for whatever reason, you've got a couple of backups. The other thing that it allows for is, and this depends on your stance on how hard you wash out the sponge filter, you can wash one on one water change and you can wash one on the subsequent water change, and that way you're not necessarily clouding your beneficial bacteria back to oblivion. And as you can see, the fish are pretty bright and happy. Some of these fish are pretty large. These tanks we're looking in now are only about 200 litres of volume. We've got our 3 filters running in this case. Lots of Malawis and Victorian cichlids doing real well in this situation. On this side, a few more Tanganyikans involved, and we all know the sort of history of tangs being a bit susceptible to nitrates. Definitely susceptible to the other nasties, so we want to work through and get to the nitrate level. And my approach to filtration is the sponges are the first line of defence, and if they're working properly, in conjunction with allowing algae to form on all your rocks and back glass where need be. And the key in my situation, I love to run some of this floating plant, because that kind of mops up any nitrate as soon as it comes along. So that allows me to get through to some decent time between water changes, and that marries up with you know, when I'm going into a tank to try and harvest fish that are holding. So that's sponges in the larger tanks. Around this side I have smaller tanks, and you're probably going to be horrified by the glass. Like, the tanks look terrible, but the water clarity is actually very good if you clean the front glass. I just don't touch a lot of these tanks a lot, because I'm trying to breed fish, or they're just happier, you know, with that sort of seclusion of having dirty glass. And when you can see, because I'm a small facility, I've crowded as many tanks as I can in here. And that brings me on to one of the main reasons I run the sponge filters. This is such a small room, 8 metres by 3 metres of footprint, that if I was to try and run canister filters or internal filters, like where are they going to sit? I'm going to lose a lot of space. It's one of the reasons I don't run sumps. The other reason I don't run sumps is that I love to be able to have a standalone tank so that I could be keeping a discus in this tank and a clownfish in the next. I don't want to be limited by what water parameters I can have available. This is an example of one of my shallow tanks. These are only about 30 tall. And you can see that's pretty hectic for how vigorous that bubble is, even if you choke it back. We'll look at sort of mitigating that violent sort of flow. I don't think the fish care at all. When we do our build of our K1 reactor shortly, and with a view to sort of mitigating the sheer turbulence and the sound, like it's pretty violent bubble coming off that filter, and we're going to try and address that. The sponges are just, I think, underrated for the load they can deal with. These couple of tanks are my big grow out tanks. We throw a couple of hundred fish in here at a time, and we're doing a lot of feeding, heavily salted, just trying to get them through to marketable size as quickly as possible. So over 200 fish in the tank with the yellows here, 3 sponge filters souped up with the K1 reactors. Bottom tank, a couple of hundred fish again, same arrangement, 3 big filters, and that's handling that waste pretty well. Like I don't think they look too bad at all. For clarity, this is a couple of weeks since my last water change in there, so those sponges deal with it really nice. I am running in these couple of big tanks a small internal filter as well. Not so much for the sake of the filtration, but in this case I'm actually after some surface agitation and oxygenation and dispersal of food, so that I can get food throughout the tank pretty quickly so that the smaller fish get a crack at it as well. But all underpinned by my sponges once again. Lastly, we'll have a look at it. The biggest tank I own. This is my Frontosa tank. We've got just on the 8 foot long here, 450 odd litres of volume, and there'd be some Frontosa breeders out there that would be pretty horrified to know that I'm filtering this with sponge filters. We've got 3 in here in total, 2 of which have been fitted with the K1 jars, and a third that I haven't got to yet because I've got to find a large jar. I put a good chunk of the media in here, but we've got Frontosa breeding in a tank purely with K1 medias and sponge filters. So obviously I have to be onto my maintenance with these because the fronties are getting big food and they're a bit messy, but the filters handle it. The Frontosa are breeding. We've got Malawi Barracuda in here breeding. I can't advocate highly enough for how well these simple filters work and what you can get out of them if you're willing to think for yourself, I guess, or be brave and don't just believe everything you see on YouTube, except for what I'm telling you on YouTube. So now, maintenance of these things is important. It's a bit fiddly, but it's not rocket surgery. We can barrel through here pretty quickly. My system's built on a herringbone of airline all the way around my room, and if I want to clean a sponge, I've just got to disconnect from that, lift it out. I don't want to make too much mess here, so I bring a container to the party. And I'm going to wash this out in my sink today. Now, in the home situation, the key thing is here, we do not want to be washing our sponges under chlorinated water, right? So direct tap water is a big no-no. So at home, what a lot of people will do is remove some of their aquarium water into buckets and do some mushing in a couple of successive buckets. Given my scale, I'm lucky enough to have 3 filtrations of my inlet water, so I've got an ability to direct my water from my taps either through this series of filters, which is a sediment filter paper cartridge in the first instance and a secondary activated carbon filter, and that directs my water through and back into all around the place. So for me to wash this out, our tap makes a bad noise sometimes, is quite simple, and I can do this down the sink. And note that the K1 I'm not touching, I never touch that. I keep it wet when I've got it out of the tank situation for as long as possible, so don't forget and go and mow your lawn and forget that's on the bench. In terms of washing, we're just gently massaging that under our water, and you can see the amount of crap that's coming out of there. And I'm experimenting with it at this stage. You might have seen videos me talking about my Daphnia culture, and I'm actually in the process of experimenting with this as a means of feeding the Daphnia culture, and that's been working pretty well. I'm happy with that. You don't have to wash it till the water is pure and pristine. That's good enough on the washing. I'm a breeder of African cichlids, and part of the problem with that is that I'm running a lot of salts in my tank, and that can lead to a few little issues with your sponges, and it's just routine maintenance that we disassemble them, and sometimes you'll see a little bit of muck in and around the base, and that's basically scale or just deposition of the minerals in the water, and that can choke down the flow, and it's good to stay on top of it. And what I've learned over the journey, a couple of very basic tools. That's about I think about a 2mm drill bit, a 1/16 of an inch in the old, and if we get that into the centre, and you can sort of hear that scratching, I'm just breaking away that scaly deposit that builds up inside, and it's always easier to sort of start from the bottom end and not get it stuck. And this is where the paper clip can come in handy, because the paper clip will do close to the full length of that barrel, that airline tube, as long as your paper clip is fairly straight. And bear in mind, don't drive it through and poke it into your hand. Rightio, to reinstall, we're popping our chamber back on top, and just a little trick, I don't put the base back on just yet, because what I want to do is use my airflow, if I can find the hole, to purge any of that crap out of the base of my filter, so that any little bits of grit and stuff that I've just scraped off the base of the filter. Ease your weighted base back on, and and reposition, and we're pretty good. We've got a few bubbles escaping out the outside there, which is just a matter of wiggle and jiggle. So that's washing a filter out, folks. Just remember, don't put chlorine anywhere near it, because you've spent all this time getting that good bacteria on your filter. You do not want to kill it. Okay. 5 pros, 5 cons. I'll try and be fair. I'll try and call balls and strikes. We'll go positive first. And with me in a large facility, it always comes back to cost. So number one positive for me is that these are a cheap filter. By cheap, affordable. I don't necessarily mean that they're nasty cheap. As we can see here, here's a screenshot of a pricing from an Australian website currently for one of these. So 13 odd bucks for a filter that's going to get you a decent capacity on a large breeding tank, and so that's a big tick. Second one I'd say as a follow-on is the power usage. I'm filtering 99 tanks in my room. I must have 200 of these filters around the room off one air blowing system, which is the whiny noisy thing we hear in the background. 370 watts of power to filter all these tanks. That's a lot of power to you at home in the average household, but in your situation, running a sponge filter off a small aerator that's drawing maybe 5 watts, maybe 7 watts, that's pretty cheap filtration. Third one we'll talk about is the longevity of these things. So there's no moving parts, so nothing's going to wear out on them. There's no bang bangs, there's no grinding, there's nothing spinning. It's all hard plastic, all the soft sponge, so nothing's going to wear out on these. The fourth one I'll talk about is the same thing. The plastic is as we know environmentally, is a scourge. It's going to last longer than I am. It's going to last longer than my grandkids are. So if you look after these things, they can become a family heirloom in the hobby, and that's something that they've got over your external canister filters. They're going to last the test of time if you look after them. 5, let's go the fact that, as we discussed before, the 3 types of filtration, we're getting 2 of them in such a small unit without having to have trays of media like you would in a canister filter. They're just a simple build, and I think simple is key. Time for some cons to go through with the filters. Number 1, out of the box, the filter isn't carrying mature loading of the beneficial bacteria that we need to get the biological filtration ticked off. So that's something that's going to take a month to 6 weeks in a tank to get rolling with, so bear that in mind. The second one I'll talk about is the noise aspect. You can hear in the room that we've got a bit of bubbling and bloop, bloop, bloop noise going on in the background. I'm going to drop a GoPro into a tank here to give you a bit of an idea of that. I'll just shut up for a minute. So that's a noise that out here in my fish room, it doesn't matter a bugger to me, but obviously in your lounge room that's going to be annoying at night time. But we can sort of mitigate that sound with our K1 filter jar that we're going to make at the end of the video. Number 3 on the negative is the ability to be able to filter deeper tanks with these can be limited. Head pressure is how hard your air pump's going to have to work to get an air bubble down to the bottom of your filter, and deeper tanks obviously make that process harder, and you're going to need a pretty powerful air pump to get around that. I've got some B-roll here of my tanks at varying depth. The first tank's only 30 centimetres deep. Obviously the sponges can smash that situation because there's not much head pressure to work with. My standard 45 centimetre tanks are a slightly different prospect. And lastly, the 50 centimetre tank here, even my big air blower does struggle to run these filters if I place them on the bottom of the tank. And the way to get around that is to lift them up off the bottom so that you're minimising that head pressure. They still find the particulates off the bottom pretty well in this situation, so not a game breaker. The fourth con I'll talk about is the fact that whilst they're very strong, and I've spoken about the positivity of the no moving parts thing, it's a strong plastic, but it doesn't mean it's not brittle. They don't do well if you drop them, especially the base component. That's quite heavy. It's got a big disc of metal inside it, and if you drop it and you chip your plastic, that's a bit of a game breaker, unfortunately, because the metal will rust pretty quickly in your tank situation. If you're not careful the way you handle it, the stems on the inside can easily be broken, and also the little nipple on top where your airline goes in, that can eventually become brittle, and I think that's a consequence of the hard water that I run with in my tanks. So you've got to just be constantly vigilant with the way you handle these things, that you're not aggressively sort of reefing them apart. I'd always recommend sort of carefully twisting them apart like so, to try and protect those internals, because once they're cracked, you can't get a replacement part, and you kind of end up with a mismatch in your spare parts drawer of these things, and you're sort of constantly hoping you break the right part of the next one to be able to make a new set out of old parts. Number 5, I'd go with probably the aesthetics of them. They're not the most amazing thing to look at in your tank. And especially if you're talking a display tank or a feature in your house, it's less is more when it comes to equipment being visible. That doesn't mean that you can't do some clever scaping and hide the filters down the back where they're not going to be visual. And in my situation, I don't care, because my tanks aren't for looking at, they're for breeding fish. So it's not a deal breaker. Just be mindful that you're going to have to maybe be a bit clever with the way you position them. So that's my big spiel about the Humble sponge filter. I'm a super big advocate of them. I think they're just tremendous value for money at the price, and they do a hell of a lot for me. Now, what we've been waiting for is the build on the K1. And what occurred to me one day, when you look at a sponge filter in action, it's doing its job there, and that's fantastic. But basically, once that bubble's exiting the filter, it's really doing bugger all. It's not giving us any great level of oxygenation in the tank. It's just drifting to the surface. However, we've bought and paid for the power to run that thing. So here's our jar in action. What that's doing is basically doubling, I would say, at least doubling and possibly more, the capacity of our filter for no whatsoever extra energy costs. Yes, we've got a couple of parts involved here. We've got a plastic jar and we've got some K1 media. I will do a full product review on K1 media one day, because it is one of the aquarium products that I do highly advocate for. Alright, so here are the bits and bobs we're going to use to knock up our K1 fluid bed media, if you want to call. This is a peanut butter jar, right? A lot of the jars around my room are bought from a containers provider, and
unfortunately you've got to buy them in bulk, 48 to a box, and a bit of a spend. Back in the day I bought them for about $4 each. They've gotten a bit brittle over the journey, and I'm in the process of fixing a few around the room where I've had cracks. This is a peanut butter jar from the house, nice and clean. We've got our label off and we've removed the wadding from inside. So that's something that's going into your recycling as a rule, but we can put that to good use now to make our filter. The key ingredient here is the K1 filter media. This comes in a couple of different sizes. We've got the micro and the standard sizing there. And what they are effectively is like a little, think of it like a little coral reef or a mangrove estuary where water is going through this media, and the little beads are going to roll around with all sorts of angles, nooks and crannies, and that's where your beneficial bacteria are going to find their little place. And the benefit of fluid bed media over the sponge filter is that we know that water is lazy. It will find its way through a pathway of least resistance, and with our sponge, if you get parts that are clogged, it's going to go around them an easier way. With the fluid bed media, with constant motion, those bacteria are getting a great access to fresh water the whole way through. So that's the guts of why this is such a great product and why I love it. We're going to finish, go on to our building now. Basic tools, drill, a few different size drill bits. What we're going to do is we're going to start at the top with a 6mm drill into the top of our jar, centre if you like, anywhere. Blunt hole drill. That's our hole for our airline to go in, and we want, a semi-firm fit there. I've got a few tags to get off. Might have to. Might have made a slightly too small choice on the drill bit, but righto, that's going in there now. Now, if you think back to the part where I was talking about the cons of our air filter, our sponge filter, was I mentioned the noise aspect. What I'm using now is a smaller drill bit. I'd say that's about a 3mm, and this is just going to be holes in the top of our jar to allow air escape. And I'm thinking small holes is better in terms of forcing a smaller bubble to escape. You don't need too many holes. Six or so is going to be enough. So that's the top end of our jar looked after. The next step is to cut the hole for our, I'll just quickly pull out our filter back apart, and this is the key. This is something I learned through the journey by trial and error. I originally cut some of these holes too large. What we want to do, and this will work for other sponge filters, where this diameter is the key diameter. We want our hole saw to allow this through, but not the little collar at the top. And the reason being, let's cut our hole and I'll explain why that's important. So we're going to match our hole saw, which I think in this case is about a 30mm. But as I said, check if you're going to do this with any other sponge filter, measure. I've already made a little pilot hole in the centre of our lid, so we're just going to go on through, and now we've got our hole for our barrel. And what we're looking for here is that to be able to drop through, but be caught by that collar on top. And you're probably thinking, why is that important? So when I bang our filter back together and we put our lid on our jar,
human nature is we're pretty lazy. So when you go into your tank to take this out for cleaning, the easiest thing to grab is that. Now, in the early days, I made a few where I'll explain it a bit better by showing you an old lid that's no longer any good. I made a few like this back in the day, right? And the problem then becomes that if your cap's on top of there and you grab by the jar and for whatever reason that cap came off your barrel, as you're lifting it, suddenly all your K1 media just goes whooshka into your tank and you're there for an hour picking it all back out. By being particular about that diameter, it's possible that the barrels might disassemble there as you pull the thing out, but this part is going to form a plug, so you're not going to lose your K1 media throughout your tank. So that's my tip to you as a several times loser on the subject. At this stage we don't necessarily retain the uplifted tube, and in terms of how much media to put in these, you don't need it chock-a-block full. Half a jar is good. So you get the idea there. The last step, which can be fiddly depending on how loose your hole that you've drilled for the line through the jar is, as to whether you're dropping that. But this is the only real fiddly part. You have to get that air line onto there without spilling your beads. Turn it upside down, screw it in, and there you have it. That's your supercharged sponge filter, now with a fluid bed media on top. And this K1 is fantastic, and don't be concerned if when you first put one of these in your tank the K1 kind of sits in a clump. It kind of takes a time to get its own colony of bacteria, and it almost acts like a form of lubrication. They will roll and start to move over time. So that's it, folks. As you've seen in many of my videos, I've got heaps of these around the room. They work bloody great. Okay, this is future me. I was doing the final sort of editing pass on my work, and as you can tell, I probably don't follow a script to any great letter, and I completely left out a little thing I wanted to mention when we built our filter, and that was the potential to maybe incorporate some activated carbon into one of these to give us that third type of filtration, the chemical filtration. In my situation, I don't need it because I'm pre-treating my water for chlorine, chloramine, so it's not, that's a key one that you would want to take out. And I'm not running a lot of wood or planted material in my room, so I'm not getting tannins or discoloration of water from that point of view. So that's a key one that activated carbon is often used for. And so, yeah, in my case, I just haven't needed to. Where I think you could actually use some activated carbon is straight in our jar, right? So the carbon will sink and the little K1 beads are going to float, as we've seen in operations all around the room. So I don't see a reason why that carbon shouldn't work, other than in the large wide mouth jar that I'm using, there might be some pockets at the sides and around the edge where the circulation through the carbon isn't very good because the bulk of that air and updraft and water that's being drawn up into this chamber is dead centre. Now that's with the wide mouth jar. However, if you're going to modify a conical style vessel, as we saw in the filter that I washed out, this is a thing I pick up from where I work as a throwaway, and I got hundreds of these years ago and put them on my filters originally. thinking they were pretty good. They were actually tricky to fit to your filter, which is why I've moved away from them in most cases, but good conical shape, and with the focus of that air at the bottom of that V, I think something like this would work really well with carbon on the bottom and then your K1 on top. And if you're thinking what a pain when it comes time to chuck out my carbon and go to some new stuff, that's not going to be a game changer. Just get yourself a tub, tip the whole lot, K1 and carbon into a bowl, get some water in there, give it a mix, let the carbon go to the bottom again, and then you can pour off your K1 into a container, chuck out your old carbon, try it again. It's something that I've contemplated. I've never bothered to get to it because, as I said, I don't use carbon. If you give it a go and you think it's a winner, chuck a comment down for us and pass on the news to others that might engage, and give it a try. See if you can prove me wrong or right. I hope you got something out of today. If you did, please give me a subscribe and a like and tell your mates and all that good stuff, and we'll see you again for the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye.